extreme apologies for the what can only be described as a catastrophic technical failure there, due to the fact that the OBS software basically has a freak out if the camera gets unplugged at any point. So I'm having to start this as a whole new stream because at a certain point today I unplugged the camera when I was dusting the desk, and that meant that basically when what I thought was set up and all ready to go turned out not to be the case. And so when I clicked onto the studio here to try and go live, the microphone worked, even though that had been plugged and unplugged. You unplug the camera, the whole system has to be restarted. So learning point for me is don't unplug the fucking camera unless you can possibly help it. So I apologize to everybody who was hanging around there, but we can now get started, and audio will be uploaded to Patreon as per usual. And yes, good to see people coming into the chat already. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch straight into this because we have been delayed by 10 minutes due to excessive fucking around. So let's get started. So the purpose of tonight's stream is to throw out some analysis of the chopping and changing that's going on inside the US governmental machine, the imperial state structure, if you will, and to try and locate the truth as much as we can, given this, that we are in a movable situation. So, what do we know about let's just call it the Trump administration, and what is it doing? Now, it is my contention that what is going on at the moment is, it's several different things all rolled into one. So there is never any just singular cause for any event that happens either in the external world or in the internal world, in the internal world of our own physical and mental health. There's never any one single event which can be said to cause something. Something can be, a trigger point. Something can be a point at which something develops. But you see, there's a whole series of events that lead up to that point, or a whole series of conditions that are present to lead up to a certain breakout into the open of contradictions. And what you've got now in the United States is a certain build-up of contradictions and a disagreement within the US ruling class as to how to proceed. That's what's manifesting inside Washington, D.C. That's what's really been running since 2015 and the emergence of Trump, which is that you have a number of factors leading to increased political instability. And this coincides with economic stagnation inside the United States, increased polarization between the classes, the large elements of the working class not voting and trying to, or so to say, passively opting out of the bourgeois political system. And you also have a crisis of imperialism, in that US imperialism is faced with the fact that its limitations have been repeatedly exposed over the last 25 years, and this has intensified since over the course of the last decade. All of this combines together to create a world in which, or more to the point, a United States in which populist waves can emerge. You get the Sanders thing, which tried twice and failed twice due to the inherent limitations of that form of social democracy and of Sanders. More on him in just a moment. And then you have the equivalent in the Republican Party, which is Trump. And both of them, Sanders and Trump, I would argue, in 2016 essentially ran on social democratic platforms. And one was more to the left of bourgeois politics, one was more to the right, both of them were in essence trying to conjure up images of the FDR-inspired late 40s, early to middle, or possibly even late 1950s, of a period of time when the United States working class had, of course, higher living standards, generally speaking, but of course the thing with any generalization is it doesn't, of course, deal with all unique sets of circumstances. And so both Trump and Sanders were trying to conjure up memories of the working classes' better off condition in the New Deal period. Both, of course, fundamentally had no intention or ability to go back to that. You cannot go back to that. We have covered this many times before. Now, the issue with Trump is, of course, he evolved his coalition to include new elements to it over time. Sanders included new elements from the existing base of the Democratic Party and did even worse the second time around, which is a testament to the fact that the Democratic Party is as vicious an anti-working class organization as the Republican Party is. They just pretend not to be. And Sanders is, of course, a wretched social chauvinist buffoon, as we will see with his reaction to the Trump and Musk's shuttering of US aid. Now, the dominant class, or the dominant faction within the ruling class of the United States, up until fairly recently, was the faction that was associated, broadly speaking, with Wall Street, with banking, to a certain extent, of course, with big tech, which, although it spreads its bets generally between Democrats and Republicans, had been aligned for quite a long time more with the Democrats than the Republicans. And in the manner of also British imperialism, it seems to me, and Americans who are watching this, feel free to offer correction if I have mischaracterized this or misdiagnosed your situation. But what was going on, it seems to me, with regards to the United States, is one of those classic divisions between elements of a bourgeoisie that is a little bit more nationally or regionally focused, and one that is purely externally focused. If you examine the Democratic Party, what you find is this really unique combination of horrors, perhaps even more unique than the Republicans. What you have is you have a main constituency which consists, because it consists of Wall Street and those who are primarily concerned with the export of capital. This is what you had under Obama anyway. This is Obama's coalition. They were, of course, even more rabidly imperialistic than Trump is. Trump himself is. Trump himself, of course, is a lower bourgeois who is mainly concerned with property deals, or has been mainly concerned with property deals and deals in the entertainment business, domestically inside the United States. And, of course, this leads him to certain points of view which are anathema, or were anathema, to the wider ruling class, or the dominant faction in the ruling class, who are overwhelmingly concerned with the export of capital. And this is the group which were rabidly enthusiastic about Obama, about Hillary Clinton, less enthusiastic about Joe Biden, and much less enthusiastic about Kamala Harris. Now, the point about this group is that it needs to maintain, or needed to maintain, this sort of increasingly threadbare coalition in the Democratic Party. So you have the the richest, most powerful, most vicious, most reactionary elements of the US bourgeoisie, of the imperialist bourgeoisie, all in bed with the Democrats for a while. Of course, a certain section of them backed the Republican challengers, a certain section of them backed Romney, a certain section of them, of course, before that, backed John McCain, but the bulk of them were happy with Obama. He was pursuing their agenda. The amount of US capital that was being exported in the form of foreign direct investment was increasing all the time. Obama was doing a good job for them. They certainly didn't want Trump and trade wars and protectionism. However, certain contradictions start to creep in over time. The model of imperialism, typified by US aid, National Endowment for Democracy, and other things like them, that was a really big thing in the later Bush administration, and certainly in the Obama administration. This model ran aground, or it started to run aground. Various other governments, principally the Chinese and the Russians, started to work out what the NED and USAID were up to, and as I've said before, started to find ways of shutting down their operations, or at least managing to limit the damage that they could do. Same is true in Belarus. Same is true to a lesser extent in so far in Hungary with Orban. Fico they just tried to kill and didn't work. And in Serbia, of course, even though Vucic is a slippery bastard, who I wouldn't trust as far as I could throw him, he has so far managed to withstand the various civil society-oriented regime change attempts. Now, it's worth just pausing here for a moment to consider why this model became the dominant form of regime change operation. It became the dominant form precisely because precisely because of the limitations of US imperialism. They worked out that they could, in this unipolar moment after the counter-revolution destroyed what was left of the socialism of the 20th century, the actually existing socialism of the 20th century, they realized that they could, via domination of so-called civil society organizations, following the comprehensive defeat of the working class and the peasantry after the counter-revolutions of 89 to 91, they could run these disruption operations, regime change operations, via mobilization of disgruntled petty bourgeois elements. And this is indeed what they have done. And they can do that for the reasons I've specified before. If you go back into the archive and you find the stuff that I've done on colour revolutions, you can see there the essential elements of a colour revolution, which is in brief that you have to have a certain level of street mobilization, the ability to at least cause the perception of a certain amount of chaos, and you have to be able to trigger a split within the governing group in doing so. That's a very shorthand version of what I put into that episode. But it depends really upon triggering a split within the existing ruling class and government, or aiding one side of that split against another. So the street mobilizations which you see in places like Ukraine, and just to answer Luca's question briefly from the chat, civil society organizations are those which, I mean, this is largely a sort of Gramscian term. It is basically like the NGO operations. So USAID funding media operations, cultural organizations, that kind of thing. And they do that for the specific purpose of training, politically educating US-sponsored political cadres that can then organize and mobilize to carry out disruption operations, riots, etc. So they're one part of the US regime change operation. The NGOs are. This is what civil society organizations means. The other part is the muscle, and the muscle comes in a more traditional manner from like CIA organized fascist organizations. This is true in Ukraine, it's true in Georgia, it's true in various other countries as well. The liberal EU-loving technocrat organization that is mobilized onto the streets, they're the public face. The more honest face are the what were once called the Azov Battalion, or the other extreme like fascistic organizations that are mobilized in a place like Ukraine, or in the case of Syria, you get your NGO type operation on the one hand, and you get Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, ISIS on the other. So it needs the muscle there to build the pressure operation. The idea being, you mobilize in the streets, you then create various media events that are carefully curated, and you manage this like you're basically shooting a real life film. And this is what's been done. Really, the model that they've worked off for years now, for 36 years, is the overthrow of Ceausescu in 1989, particularly when somebody was placing sniper teams on the roofs of buildings in Bucharest and shooting dead demonstrators to basically further amp things up. So the point about all of this is the aim of a colour revolution is to destabilise a government, to cause a split or maximise a split inside the ruling class, and to cause one faction of the ruling class to essentially join with the US side, and to cause the state machine to split and become uncontrollable, and for a big faction of the state forces to go over to the US side, or the US sponsored side. This, of course, worked effectively for many years, but eventually was worked out, and it runs aground when the state forces of a place like China or Russia know how to handle the demonstrations. They know how to not get panicked when the US and the British in particular curate loads of media events. So if you remember the events in Hong Kong, 2018, 2019, there was loads of these what I would call curated media events. And the aim of these was to try and destabilize the Hong Kong government, and of course through that the wider Chinese government. The Chinese government had worked it out to what was going on by that stage, and so didn't respond in the way that the US wanted. There was no split in the Chinese party or state, and they didn't manage to achieve what they wanted to through this Hong Kong destabilization operation. From there, of course, various countries led by China and Russia did work out how to respond to these operations, because so much of them are literal, like psyops, designed to produce a real-world response, a real-world split in the state, a real-world actual split in terms of the response of the state forces to the demonstrations. Now, what's happened is, since that's been worked out and it's no longer effective, or no longer as effective, well, then you have now a split within the US ruling class itself. The US ruling class itself they're now disagreeing with each other about the best way to proceed. Some of them favour continuing in the old way. It looks like that group is on the back foot right now, because the Biden administration proved that this color revolution type event organization is not working. It didn't work in Russia. It didn't work in China under Trump or Biden. But most of the action there happened under Trump and before him, Obama. So it's not worked in either of the cases of the big rivals to the United States. And the Chinese openly published guidance on how to get around a color revolution and put it on the internet. So with that in mind, you need to change tactics. And the change in tactics is coming, and it's combined with, as I have said before, an attempt to carry out a sort of re-legitimation operation inside Washington, D.C. Now, what do I mean by this? A certain section of the US ruling class is aware that they are facing a growing amount of discontent. This is the part of the reason why they've turned to Trump. Because Trump, even though they might not like him very much, they think he's too crude, he gives away too much when he starts bragging about all the crimes he's going to commit. They don't like him particularly, but they've worked out, and again, you will permit me to blow my own trumpet just for a moment. Many of us, including me, did see this coming. All the way back in 2021, which is that Trump would be brought back if the Democrats were unable to solve, or when the Democrats were unable to solve, the systemic crises of US imperialism. And indeed, Trump has been brought back partly for the purposes of managing domestic dissent, meaning that Trump is such a big presence and of course plays the populist card an awful lot. Some in the US ruling class have clearly decided, well, it's better to have him there capturing some oppositional energy that he will lead down a cul-de-sac than to try and force another 4 years of the Democrats and have things become more unstable. Better to have Trump in and maybe take the sting out of the situation. So you have that. You also have the shake-up of the state, the rolling up of US aid, the apparent move to close down or downscale things like Radio Liberty, which, as Musk correctly pointed out, like no one listens to it anymore, and everyone's worked out what it is. It's like this isn't the 1960s anymore. Everybody knows that Radio Free Europe is basically the CIA operations. So the change has been necessitated by the fact that there is this crisis. Their usual regime change operations that they've used for a generation now have stopped working. Everybody's worked them out. Everybody knows what to look for in terms of US intelligence assets, and so a change is required. However, it is an urgent change that's required because, of course, the US is, and in the view of their ruling class, losing out on various different trade deals and various different markets to principally the Chinese, who are offering much better terms of trade than the United States or the European Union, or the British, come to that. So change is required, and you need to shake up the state. You need to also make it look as if Trump is carrying through some kind of political revolution, which I noticed that various YouTube grifters are describing it that way. And you need to make it look as if there is some kind of big change, whereas in actual fact there isn't much of anything changing at all. Now, of course, we should be very clear that we are grateful to Comrade Donald for certain things. The revelation that came out that literally like the entire Kiev regime media operation was funded by US aid was something that everybody suspected, but it's useful to have it confirmed. That US aid was funneling money to the BBC and other British media institutions like The Guardian shouldn't be a surprise, but good to have it confirmed. And of course that the US aid was funding the likes of the bread tubers is hilarious. The likes of Vaush, the sweaty, obese potential sex offender. I'm going to be slightly careful with the words there, but there's plenty of footage of him admitting to his rather disgusting predilections, so you can go and look that up if you don't believe me. But the fact that they were funding all of these characters in this massive media funding operation, again, should not be a surprise. It should not be a surprise to us. This is what the US has been specializing in for many years. They have had great success at cultural influencing operations over the last 30 years and creating psyops, creating heavily mediated events. I mean, you can tell that some of the people who have designed some of these events have been avid readers of theorists like Guy Debord, Society of Spectacle, etc. I'll go into more on that in future episodes. But change over to new tactics. Change over to new tactics needed by the US ruling class, because this is now falling to pieces. So better to get out ahead and just snap and just roll up the whole thing yourselves than face the embarrassing mess of it being rolled up by other countries. But where does that leave them? What are they going to do now? Well, we've already seen like the way in which this other section of the US ruling class thinks. They are, of course, we now see the big tech giants defect over to the camp of Comrade Donald, who is, of course, promising them all kinds of things, mainly involving state subsidies, and they're continuing to try and build essentially like a high-tech police state based on various different applications that are the speciality of companies like Facebook, or Meta, as Zuckerberg insists on calling them now. So the similar agendas are being pursued. It's just that certain factions in the ruling class have changed sides, and now we are faced with the fact that they are needing to change tactics overseas. Now, so just to address a point that has come up multiple times, is the US ruling class accepting a lesser role for itself? Absolutely not. Why? It's not merely a matter of calculation or recalibration of priorities. They are trying to reform their tactics, but they can't stop with their overall aims. They can't stop with their overall aims precisely because, like the regime change operations that they pursue, this is not just a hobby that USAID and the NED were engaging in. This represents a very real requirement of the entire US imperialist bloc. And here we will get into the details of, well, what is the US imperialist bloc? It is broadly speaking, the bloc of imperialist powers put together by the United States, and they include, of course, the defeated powers and the weakened powers of World War II, the European imperialists. That is what the US imperialist bloc consists of, and you have, of course, contained within that the Canadians, who Trump keeps making a lot of rather hilarious threats to about becoming the 51st state. I can answer questions on that later if you in the audience want me to. I don't think it's a going idea. You have like the Western Europeans, the Canadians, the Aussies, the New Zealanders, and maybe a couple of other countries thrown in there for good measure, but that's the main ones. It's the Five Eyes, it's the G7, it's the western part of the original countries of the old European Economic Community, this old signatories of the Treaty of Rome, basically. So that's the US imperialist bloc, and the most powerful elements of it, other than the US itself, of course, dwell within Western Europe. So when we call it an imperialist bloc, what do we mean, though? Now, what we mean, what we're doing here is looking at the way in which the US does business in terms of where it sends its capital. Now, if you want to look at this, I would recommend using this US Bureau of Economic Affairs statistic, and they publish this on a fairly regular basis. I'm just going to put that in there. Now, what they put in on that site is essentially a breakdown of where US foreign direct investment goes, and if you look, it's a gigantic amount of money that goes to various different places. So the bulk of US direct investment and the bulk of direct investment back into the United States is both of which involve Europe. So if you look at the graphic on that page I've just posted the link to, you can see quite clearly that the US foreign direct investment in 2023, so the 2024 figures will be out like midpoint of this year coming up. But in 2023, it was $3.95 trillion invested by US, what's defined as multinational enterprises, into the European nations, including Britain. So that's a huge amount of money. And that's up by over $100 billion from the previous year. And where does the bulk of this actually go, though? So, according to the US Bureau of Economic Affairs, and I'm going to quote directly from this, so just to show you like where they say this money goes. So, US BEA report says the following: US multinational enterprises invest in nearly every country, but their investment in affiliates in 5 countries accounted for more than half of total US direct investment abroad position at the end of 2023. The position was largest in the United Kingdom, which has over $1 trillion invested in it. So that much of that will be going through the City of London, but there'll be other areas as well. Followed by the Netherlands, 980.4 billion, Luxembourg, 532.5 billion, Ireland, 491.2 billion, and Canada, 451.6 billion. Rounded out the top 5. By industry of the directly owned foreign affiliate, investment was largest in holding companies, which accounted for 48.8% of the overall position abroad in 2023. Manufacturing affiliates were second largest with 14.9%, and finance and insurance affiliates were third largest with 13.6% of US investment. By industry, of the US parent, investment by manufacturing multinational enterprises accounted for 50.6% of the position, followed by multinational enterprises in finance and insurance at 15%. US multinational enterprises earned income of $577.2 billion in 2023 on their cumulative investment abroad, a 2.3% increase from 2022. Dividends or repatriated profits decreased $61.1 billion or 17.6% to $285.3 billion in 2023. So, if you missed the significant part of that, in the last paragraph there, they say they are investing more overseas, but the actual amount of dividends declined. So the actual profits from US foreign direct investment in 2023 declined by 17.6%, which is no small beer, to say the least. But let's go back to where the money's going. So this money, this gigantic amount of cash which is going to principally Europe, where's it going? So nearly 50% of it is going to holding companies. So what is a holding company? Well, it's essentially, I would argue, a company which quite literally holds the shares of various other different enterprises. So it's essentially a monopolist. So they're investing in European monopolies, principally. That's where a lot of the money's going. But the biggest single percentage goes on manufacturing. So US multinationals are investing a huge amount, a very significant amount of money in manufacturing across the European countries. Now, equally so, almost the exact same amount, though slightly less, then comes back into the United States from Europe. We see that the foreign direct investment inside the United States shows us that the top investing country is the Netherlands from Europe, which invests $717.5 billion in the US in 2023, followed by the Japanese, $688.1 billion, Canada, $671.6 billion, and Britain, $630.1. So a lot of money flows into Europe and Britain from the United States through FDI, and a lot of money flows back out again. It's a circular, cyclical process of investments and returns. So, given the US investment pattern in Europe and then the return of investment from Europe back into the United States, where is a lot of this money going? And this is here we get to the point about this being a bloc, an imperial bloc, with, of course, the US in the leading role, and without the US's power, a lot of the exploitation of neo-colonial nations cannot happen. But it is by no means the case that the nations such as the Netherlands and Britain and what was West Germany, now Germany, are powerless in all of this. Remember, the imperialists needed to be allied with each other when faced with a unified socialist bloc in the 1940s and early 1950s. And they have remained allied with each other because the Europeans still have certain advantages that the US does not have, can still move an awful lot of capital around. And of course the US wants that capital to ultimately come back to the United States, which of course an awful lot of it does. But the US investments into Europe, particularly the US investments into like holding companies, these big sort of general organizations that literally hold the stock of an awful lot of other companies, where does a lot of that money go? Now, a lot of that money will be filtered through European companies that are, of course, engaging in hyper-exploitation of areas that are more, shall we say, traditional for Europeans to dominate rather than the United States. So it's not that the US doesn't gain from investing via these European companies and European countries. It sends its money through them into other hyper-exploitable areas of the world. So whereas you look at like Asia Pacific and Latin America, Middle East, etc., and see that, or Africa, and see that US direct investment there looks actually quite small. That doesn't tell us the full picture, because a huge amount of that direct investment put into Europe will go through Europe and out elsewhere. So the numbers that you see on that site, whilst they can tell us a great deal, don't give us the full picture. We would need a further detailed breakdown of where that US investment into the European firms was going in terms of the countries that it was ultimately destined to head to. The point about all of this is that I contest, and I contest because of what these figures tell us. There are those that say, oh well, the US is gonna leave Europe. There are those that say that the US has had enough of Europe. Couldn't be further from the truth. You mean the US is going to give up a position where they are literally investing 3.9 trillion a year and getting back 3.462 trillion a year? Think they're going to give that up? No, of course they're not, because it's not just the investments into Europe. As I said, it's the investments which flow into Europe and then out into other neo-colonial states. And the US can't replace that gigantic place of investment overnight. And to adequately control the European nations and make sure that things continue to be conducted in those countries in a way which creates what you would call a favorable business environment for the United States, to that end, this is part of the reason why they need NATO, why they need US bases in all these different countries. It's because a huge amount of US imperialism's business is done in and through Europe, and you need Europe to be stable. You need it to be consistently creating favorable business environments inside each country. And you need the European Union to be compliant in terms of what you want to do. And they've got all that. So the US is not leaving Europe anytime soon. They can't replace the amount of business that they do there and going through there. Nor are the Europeans going to divest from the United States. Look how much money the Dutch, the British, and others send into the United States every year. See, this trade, this relationship isn't going away. It's also, by the way, just as an aside, why you are absolutely not going to get the US invading Canada or something stupid like that, no matter what Trump's bullshit of today says. The US is already getting an awful lot out of Canada, and the Canadians invest far more in the US than the US invests in Canada. And the US essentially controls the Canadian military. They control the sea lanes around Canada. They can easily control the airspace over Canada. They are looking to basically drive a harder bargain with the Canadians over certain things. That's what all this talk is about. The US ruling class has no interest in running Canada. Why would they? They're getting everything they need out of it already. They're just trying to grind their allies more to make up for the losses they're going to incur on this Ukraine business. So the point about all of this and how it relates back to the regime change business, when people say, well, there's no direct US interest in country X or country Y, it's more of a European thing, that is to neglect and ignore the reality of US investment inside Europe. See, there's always a US interest. The companies that might be have their names above the door and who go into places in the Balkans, places in the Caucasus, places in the Middle East, the names above the door might be Dutch or German or British or Italian or Spanish or Portuguese, but we take a step back and you look at, well, who's capitalizing those companies? And an awful lot of the time, you're going to find that there are a lot of the capital coming into those companies which are doing the hyper-exploitation of neo-colonized nations and peoples. The capital that's going to be behind it, and a significant part of the dividends, is going to be, of course, coming from and going back to the United States. And this, in essence, is why they are not going to give up Europe. They're not going to give up the regime change business either. Neither the Americans nor the Europeans, because this is a bloc which cannot and will and which cannot afford to break down. US cannot afford to simply walk away from Europe. The US cannot afford to simply allow the Eastern European nations to break away and go their own way. This, by the way, this is why Obama was so insistent that the Greeks go bankrupt. Or the Greeks basically agree to put their Greek working class into abject penury. Over 10 years ago, when the Greek debt crisis was at its peak, you got that fucking ridiculous buffoon Alexis Tsipras trying to appeal to Obama. And Obama thoroughly backing up Merkel, saying, "No, fuck you, pay me," to quote the late great Ray Liotta. Now, why would he do that? What possible interest could the US have in Greece, other than, of course, the NATO interest? Well, here's the thing. If the European Union gets damaged and goes down, which it might do at some stage, but had back then the Greeks basically turn around and go, "Fuck off, Angela, we're not paying. We are defaulting on the debt," that would have started a chain reaction that would have potentially destroyed the euro and maybe destroyed the entirety of the EU project. The US needs the EU project. The US, thanks to its investment pattern, needs a strong European Union. Not one that can go its own way, but one that can act as a reliable vehicle for investments. Not just investments inside Europe, but also investments inside other neo-colonial nations. So the US has an active interest in maintaining the EU. They have an active interest in maintaining it as a credible trading bloc and economic bloc. They have an active interest in making sure that it stays, or at least appears to be viable. Now, on the other hand, the US will routinely shaft EU nations. The US will do over a nation like France and push them out of an Australian submarine deal. The US and its allies constantly seek to get one over on each other and shaft each other in various different deals. But in the end, they hang together or they hang separately. And this is, again, why the US will always absolutely support the European Union, or has done up until this moment. And that's not going to change with Trump either. All this noise coming out of Washington now, and this is the point I'll bring my comments to a conclusion and then take some questions. All this noise from Washington, what does it truly mean? Now, I've seen Brian Berletich, a man whose opinions on some things I respect, whose opinions upon other things I wholeheartedly disagree with, but he put it down to it being a psyop, and it's not a limited hangout. It's, in essence, I don't think that's entirely wrong. In fact, I think there's a lot of truth in that. You have an element of a psychological operation directed at the petty bourgeoisie and upper working class of the United States, convincing them that this sort of Doge shake-up of US aid and the NED represents real change that's going to favour American workers. It very much does not. Then you have, of course, the psyop that's being done on other nations, which is trying to convince them that things are changing inside the United States. You can now do a deal with the United States. The terrible tactics of the Biden-Obama era are dying. You can deal with honest Donald, etc. This won't work either, because the Russians have already worked out, and Maria Zakharova, the foreign ministry spokeswoman, said this earlier today, that essentially this is just a rebrand of regime change operations. Everybody will know, like the smarter end of the Russian government, and certainly the Chinese will know, that the US cannot afford to leave the regime change business. They can't. This is a matter of the life and death of imperialism, the lifeblood of imperialism. They're not going to stop. They're just going to move to more overt, perhaps less costly in monetary terms, but we move to more overt actions, including military coups. Various different destabilization operations that are more typically, shall we say, naked and based on naked brute violence. That's where things are turning to, because the old psyop game has fallen out of favour because it wasn't delivering the goods anymore. So they're going to go back to a more traditional Cold War era Cold War era operations here. Of course, this won't solve the crisis of US imperialism. It will only intensify it. because if the US then moves into just carrying out coups and openly sponsoring military regimes, and Trump's there going, he's a good guy, this general, I like him a lot. Some people say he plays golf with human eyeballs, but maybe I saw one eyeball. Are we going to judge a man's golf game based on the ball he chooses to play with? I don't think so. Besides, does very good business. He's open to Mackie D's. He's open to Mackie D's in the capital city. You can't argue with that. You're going to see Trump waffling and wavering and justifying military dictatorships. It's actually going to damage the US's image even more than it has been already. And the US's reputation is going to continue to sink, and the pressure on it is going to increase. They're already making losses on their FDI investments, and that's only going to get worse as the position of China improves. And and it's not just the US that directly takes a hit, but the Europeans take a hit in places like the Sahel, further intensifying the crisis faced also by the US, because they are operating through European companies to make money out of exploitation of former French colonial possessions and other former European colonial possessions. So this crisis isn't going away. The changing tactics might hog the headlines for a while, but it's not going to work in terms of the ability to revive the US's regime change game. But they're going to keep doing it, they're going to keep trying it, and they're going to get increasingly violent in doing it as they are desperate to stop their decline. Now, I will now stop for comments and questions. Okay, Arcane Eclectic is enjoying the Trump impersonation. Well, good to see that. Always good to see that the work is appreciated, so to speak. Okay, so good to see so many of you here, even though we had the tech challenges. So let's just say hello to a few people. Hello to Massimiliano Urbani. Hello to Jace Hart. Hello to Alan Smith. With Nail Will, Guy Schurer, Stig Pedersen, Marius, Jenny, our moderator, good to have you with us. Bryce R. Lee Hinchcliffe, good evening to you, comrade. Daniel, out there in the West Country. Robert Zvoronich, over on Staten Island. David King, Sid Hatfield, Grassy Knoll, Luca, and Laurie Faxon's List. Hello to you out there in Sweden. We've also got with us Caustic Grip and Almir in the once and future Yugoslavia, and Isidore. So someone's asking questions on British administration. Will the US descend into British levels of administration change? Will Trump make a full term? Well, unless he drops dead, he'll make a full term, I think, because the Democrats are fucked. Everybody hates them. No one's going to fucking vote for them unless there's some serious economic collapse, and even then I don't think it'll benefit the Democrats that much. So basically, Trump will serve a full term. Whether that leads to the J.D. Vance presidency is another question entirely. At the moment, though, because the Democrats are screwed, there's no way that Trump's going to get impeached or anything. The only thing that's going to get him out of office is if he drops dead. Okay. Okay, so yes, hello to Abtin as well. Hello also to officially hello to Judith, and hello to Niall Fraser out there in Hong Kong. Abtin asks, I see the defunding of US aid as a massive retreat and ultimately a defeat for imperialism. It's hardly going to get better. Do you share this view? It's a positive thing that it's been done away with, don't get me wrong. I mean, the revelations coming out of the sort of the ending of US aid alone are worth paying attention to. It's certainly, like as I said, this is a defeat for them. The fact that they've had to come out into the open and basically trash their own operation is a serious problem for them. Now, it doesn't mean, though, that they're going to stop running these operations. They're just going to do it in increasingly desperate and crude fashions. So I would say enjoy the cringe, but they cannot afford to stop doing what they're doing. They cannot afford to stop going against the Russians, trying to undermine them, trying to destabilize the Russian government, trying to do the same job on the Chinese. And even though, of course, the Chinese have proven to be quite adept at countering it at this stage, they can't stop doing what they do. They're just going to try and do it in slightly different ways. What do I disagree about with regard to Berlitich? Berlitich's characterization of the Palestinian resistance forces as being tools of US imperialism is completely and utterly wrong. I don't know why he insists on characterizing it that way. Can't see inside the man's head, but that's my biggest area of disagreement with him. Now is the time of monsters indeed, Guy. This is indeed the Gramscian moment par excellence. And yes, like Berlitich, along with others, like they give far as I think it's was it Arcane Eclectic who said that? Yeah, Arcane Eclectic's point is correct, which is that they people like him, they see the U.S. deep state, the U.S. intelligence services as almost omnipotent. Like if they plan something, it must come true. They've planned all kinds of shit, some of which works in the end, like the Syria thing ultimately paid off for them for reasons we've gone into before. But a lot of it doesn't. A lot of it just doesn't work anymore, and never did. A lot of their plans get wrecked upon the rocks of reality. So, like, it's important not to overstate the power of these organizations. Because if you do that, then you're going to paralyze yourself and think that you can never win. It's been proven over and over again that the most sophisticated intelligence services in the world cannot stop a people who are unified in their and organized in their determination to resist. Now again, that's proven in the case of Gaza so far. That was proven in many different guerrilla warfare operations, like and national liberation struggles like in Korea, Algeria, Vietnam, Zimbabwe. All of this, of course, were struggles that the US and the British were desperate to try and crush, and it just didn't work. So you can't, if you sit there and you read all the position papers of the US intelligence services and take them at face value, you're going to come away thinking that the US is behind everything and can never be defeated. Well, they are being defeated. They are now having a huge row with each other about the way to go forward. And that's because their overseas investments, their export of capital, is returning less and less of a dividend to the United States itself. So they're in a deep crisis. And this is why you're having this row out in the open. And it's not ideal to have these rows out in the open. It would be much more efficient for them to do it quietly behind closed doors. But because the US ruling class is in a crisis and wants to address this urgently and can't agree upon a consensus of a way forward, they've had to come out into the open and have like an open clash with each other. Like shutting down government departments, like shuttering things, like throwing people out of work. All of this speaks to a crisis and the wish of the US ruling class to manipulate that crisis to make it look as if some kind of governmental change is going on, when in actual fact it is not. Right, okay. So I'm going to bring things to a close for today. Apologies for the slightly shortened stream due to technical failures, but we will be back tomorrow with Marxism and human relationships, starting off with our look at Engels' Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State. So be sure to join us on that one. And then we've got the usual Decline and Fall episode with Kit Clarenberg on Wednesday, and we've got the Debunking Anti-Communism series on Thursday. So thanks to everybody for tuning in. Thanks for bearing with me during the technical difficulties. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. Audio recording will be up on Patreon in the morning. I will bid goodnight to you for now and throw you back over to your musical interlude.
Oh. Oh, Stalin was a mighty man and a mighty man was he. He led the Soviet people on the road to victory. All through the revolution he fought at Lenin's side, and they made a combination till the day that Lenin died. He said, come on, you people, we must work with brain and hand. And then one day the Nazis came into the Soviet land. They plundered to the Volga, to Stalingrad. And then Joe Stalin said, come on, me boys, and kicked them out again. Oh, Stalin was a southerner, in Georgia he was born, where the oranges grow thick and fast and fields of waving corn. And Stalin is a farmer, his fingers they are green, and he has planted the biggest crop the world has ever seen. One day he looked upon the map and frowned and shook his head. There's too much brown and not enough green, these were the words he said. We'll have to change the weather, boys, he said, and then he smiled. So let's begin by planting trees along 3,000 miles. So Stalin rolled his sleeves up then and said it's time to start. The Volga River and the Don, they are too far apart. I think we'd better join 'em, so come and help me, pal, and we'll